Hugh, I'm not sure inflation's going the president's way as of yet, but I will agree abortion is a topic that Democrats have jumped on. What about this and how you see it?
I see it that Governors Abbott and DeSantis did in one day more for both highlighting the issue as a political dynamic, but also putting a human face on these migrants. So I've been thinking about it all day long because I do not believe in cruelty as a weapon, but I don't think it is cruel. I've been following the individual stories of the migrants, and they are speaking. They were offered the voluntary assistance to move to D.C. and to Martha's Vineyard. They did it all by consent. They are no doubt better off where they are tonight than where they were a month ago. But in one stroke, Governors Abbott and DeSantis have put a human face not only on the migrants, but on the communities that receive them without any infrastructure, Marie. I lived in Southern California for most of the last 3 decades. There isn't an infrastructure to receive 2 million people. That is a myth. The border has to be defended.
Okay, just...
Now, I am joined now by Dr. Gregory Seltz. He is the executive director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty. Good morning, Dr. Seltz. Welcome. It's good to have you on the program.
Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I'm great. I want to talk to you about the migrants because both Bret Baier and I and our colleagues all struggle with using human people as props. And I tried to say last night, they're better off, I think, than they were a month ago when they were in the hands of the cartels. I'm not sure the governor should do this again. And I really wanted a Christian take on this particular issue this morning. Of course, you're in Washington, D.C. You run the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty. First of all, tell us what the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty is.
Well, I mean, we've been in Washington, D.C. We first defended our right to be on the radio to preach the gospel back in the 40s, and that helped start the National Religious Broadcasters. And we kind of stepped back from that. Now we're back because the government seems to be encroaching on a lot of things that are generally the arena of the church. So, we decided to send a person, me, to Washington, D.C. to reestablish our voice and to defend religious liberty and the sanctity of life in Washington, D.C.
Now, inevitably, people who are here representing churches get drawn into moral, ethical discussions about abortion, about everything, but migrants are at the top of the news today. So what did you view? First, we got to establish your credibility as a scholar as well. People don't know Greg Seltz. I do because of Carl Catlin, my friend. Tell them, you did the Lutheran Hour for like 20 years, and what is your background in the Lutheran Church?
Well, actually, I'm an urban church planting kind of guy. I've served in New York City, South Central L.A. The Lutheran Hour, becoming the speaker of our evangelistic radio program, was a step away. My Ph.D. is in Black Liberation Theology and its challenge to Lutheran urban ministry and how to respond to that. So, I've always just been a churchman, but I've been a churchman in some of the biggest cities of our country. That's how I got involved in politics, because I was just trying to keep politics at bay, and that's why I think they sent me back to D.C.
So, Dr. Seltz, from that position, pastor, scholar, activist, representative of Lutherans in America, what did you make of the migrants going to the vice president's house and to Martha Vineyard yesterday?
Well, I mean, when it comes to this whole migrant issue, you got to step back and ask the question: how are we going to resolve this? I sat on a panel in D.C. I don't know, it's been 3-4 years ago now, that was talking about immigration, was talking about these things, and one of the kids, he was the head of one of the senator's offices. He got up and said something like, "How are we going to keep our nation together? This is tearing our nation apart." What's really interesting is that a rabbi who was on the panel with me stood up and said, if we all started treating each other as made in the image of God, okay, and he said we could start to solve this. Well, I always ask my people, whoever I'm talking to, how did the room respond to that? And almost everybody says, groans, silence, standing ovation. Here's the problem. Well, when I raised my hand and said, the rabbi cannot say that outside of this room. And so, again, even if you're going to start talking about policy, we got to get down to some fundamental principles that establish what are we talking about here. And so, first of all, the universal human issue of these are people, not props. But then also the ability to defend our borders and actually have a country that's a rule of law. These are the two tensions that we have to deal with. And I think there's a solution to that. But again, when you're just letting people flood into the nation, you're asking somebody to deal with that disruption. Well, the governors have actually said we're not going to deal with it alone, and have been starting to bust these folks around. I don't like the fact that now we're starting to just use these folks as human props, because that's not what I think our Lord would want us to do. But, being a faithful Christian doesn't mean we can't also defend our borders. And I think that's going to be the tension of these issues. This is, a country has a right to be a country, and then we also then as Christians have a right to serve our neighbor.
So C.S. Lewis, in his essay, The Weight of Glory, I've repaired to this couple of paragraphs, a couple of lines, many thousands of times. Quote, "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals with whom we joke, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. This does not mean that we are to be perpetually solemn. We must play. But our merriment must be of that kind, and it is, in fact, the merriest kind, which exists between people who have, from the outset, taken each other seriously. No flippancy, no superiority, no presumption." All right, did we exploit the migrants, or are they actually themselves better off, and the people who are upset are liberals who don't want to deal with it?
Well, I think better off compared to what, right? Better off compared to where they were. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I had a person who wrote me one time, was very angry at me about our position on immigration kind of thing. And he talked about, the Good Samaritan. And he said, it's my responsibility to just take care of my neighbor. I said, okay, fine. But the Good Samaritan didn't just leave water in the desert and then let the guy continue to break the laws of the land. He literally went out, bound his wounds, paid for the price, brought him to the next possible place, and actually cared about him completely. So I said, don't just, if you leave the water out in the desert so that they make it into the country, you actually are participating in their lawlessness. But if you go and bind their wounds and care for them and then take them to the justified authorities and then allow them to come into our nation legally, I'm with you. Well, guess what? He didn't want to go that full route. And I think that's what the governors are exploiting right now, is that the people who actually are the angriest right now, they want somebody else to pay the price for this. And I think that's the main issue. But yeah, they're better off. That's absolutely the case.
The liberal elite is indifferent to the issue, and if you've lived in Southern California, as I did for so long, it's overwhelmed. It's an overwhelming problem, and it's an overwhelming problem in Arizona, Nevada, and Texas. And the northern liberals don't care about the 2 million people, and the people who are taking care of them. You did urban ministry. I got a buddy, a church plant in San Diego. They do this, but they can't, they're just overwhelmed.
Right. And I served in New York City. I actually trained 75 guys. I've got a mission guy in San Diego as well. I've got mission people on the borders. I know the inhumanity. My wife served down at the borders of Texas, and her grandmother is the Hispanic Rosa Parks of West Texas. I understand this issue from a personal standpoint, and the fact that people are saying that we don't care because we want to defend our border. No, we don't. We care. That's why we defend our border, because we want people to actually aspire to America and come be a part of America. But America cannot just absorb chaos.
So the point I made to Brett last night, I just want to know, do you think that this could blow back on Republicans if they are understood to be exploiting people for the purposes of political play and drama, or if they draw a line under Martha's Vineyard in the vice president's house and leave it there, it's okay?
Yeah, I feel like we're playing with, how the Democrats play. I think secular progressives, I call them secular Puritans, have been manipulating the poor politically for a long time, and I don't like that methodology politically. But we can't look to the government to solve this question. The government's job is to protect our borders. That's the government's job. If they do that well, I think the church and free people can handle the next level of that kind of response. And I think that's how the proper differentiation of church and state should handle this. Benevolent government never works because it just destroys, and that's what I think is the issue here. People got to understand this is the government's job is to protect the border. We'll take it from there.
The 2 million people, though, have to be taken care of. When the Vietnamese refugees arrived in America, they were distributed out largely through the Catholic network. The Lutheran network might have done it too. A family, a parish
Right.
sort of thing. But
Right.
that was a few 100,000 people. It's not 2 million people a year, Dr. Seltz. I want to give you the last word. What would you like to see as a comprehensive response from the federal government to the people that are coming into the country and are not being turned away?
Well, I mean, that's what we elect them to do. But I'm just saying at this point, if you don't establish a border and a process, then nothing can be done. Again, like I said, I just think free organizations like the Lutheran Church, like the Catholic Church, obviously the government, now that these folks are here, we have to deal with folks. But even there, I think that there should be a partnership of benevolence organizations like ours, because I think we're going to go above and beyond the call of duty to this. But right now, just flooding our nation, I think, is the real issue. What are we going to do if we just keep flooding our nation with people who aren't assimilated to our way of life?
Well, in the immediate 60 days, I think people have to focus on individual people and ask, do they understand the journey they've been on and what they are going to happen to them now? I just don't think the Biden administration is doing anything at all. And what I saw the governors DeSantis and Abbott doing is just crying out for help and doing this as an illustration, which can be done once morally, but I'm not too sure. You can send them to big cities and to refugee
Right.
centers, but I don't think you can drop them off places anymore. What do you think? Last word to you, Greg.
Well, I agree with that. And like I said, I go back down to the folks in West Texas. I mean, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they're saying we have to have a policy. And the first policy has to be that our border is secure so that we can assimilate people into our neighborhoods and into our, America is an idea. America is an embodied idea. And if you can't flood that with people who don't know what that idea is and hope for it to survive.
Dr. Gregory Seltz from the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty. Great to make your acquaintance. I appreciate Carl connecting us. I look forward to talking to you in the future, Dr. Seltz. Are you on Twitter?
Yeah, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and we're on the radio on Wave Radio in Washington, D.C.
Terrific. That's the best station in Washington, D.C. It's my station. Actually, it's the religious counterpart to my. Thank you, Dr. Seltz.